Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to work on Xibalba. That is the setting for both Cause Monarchy and Dreamhold. It has its own page on fraudsclub.com, which you can check out in a link that I forgot to include in the description, actually, which I shall do now. Owned. But yes, we are going to be doing some planning. And yeah, that link should be there in a moment. Refresh if you feel like grabbing it there. And yes, we have Xibalba. It's here. I'm starting to plan it. We have 13 concepts for different races, gearing up towards that number of 20. But before I get any more concepts done for races, I wanted to spend some time actually working on the unit concepts, as well as mood boards and things that are going to inspire the visual direction of a lot of the races, which is going to be pretty helpful for me as I'm learning 3D modeling, and Alexander, Knight of the Realm, who's been doing concept art, as well as just in general for people to start building an understanding of what the general visual themes and maybe even some of the general appearances of these creatures actually are. Because we've got a very diverse cast, we'll say. What's up, Bailethal? Welcome. All right, so I guess we can begin with the Ansifi. These guys are the closest thing that the setting has to humans. So I was thinking, actually, if I look at Dr. Manhattan, which you may remember is a blue man, I was thinking of something slightly... This is embarrassing. Who did this? Who's responsible for this? But yeah, I'm thinking of like the Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen movie, or from even just the actual graphic novel. Probably not quite so human, but they are blue, right? So I was trying to think of like what are examples of like blue humans? Like this guy's just a jacked human. I was thinking of something that's very, very different than that. Oh, what's up, Kian? Let me see if I can free your introduction. Nope, your introduction is gone forever. Unfortunately, I can't seem to do that. So yeah, I'm trying to think about like ways that I can easily describe them. I guess there's also like there's like shit from Mass Effect that probably qualifies. Oh wait, no, I think Asari were entirely female, weren't they? At least I don't remember any Asari males. I think that's the race. I might be remembering incorrectly. What's up, James? What's up, Knight of the Realm? No, Dead Space is a joke. I doubt EA will ever do anything with the franchise. And just as a rule, I am never excited for remasters. They're always pranks. All right, so here's what we'll do: is we'll start to assemble a list of physical, like visual traits or whatever. So not just for the species, but also their technology. Since the Ansifi are going to be the most familiar, the most Terran-like, human-like species that we have in the setting, my initial thought for the Ansifi was something to the effect of, you know, we almost want to extrapolate existing depictions of human tech in the future, as well as the tech we have now, and just how we are as a species. I wanted to collect a list of things that might change as a result of us having different characteristics. Like, what about our history? What about our technology would look very different if we had more physical capabilities, less agile capabilities, and were generally a bit more stocky, a little bit stronger physically, but slower as well. Because those are obviously the... Yeah, what's up, Pullman? Nice troll, homie. Nice fucking troll. How you doing, dude? Because the Ansifi are going to be completely different from, like, standard issue humans in terms of their strength and their physical capabilities, theoretically, a modern day human that was happened to be a good acrobat could probably like run circles around an NCFI just because we would have more speed than they would. By a significant enough margin to be distinct, but these guys would be like bigger in general, taller, more muscle bound, you could say. The analogy that I gave to Veek when I was coming up with the concept is that if you were ever doing a weightlifting competition, like an NCFI bodybuilder would not only be able to lift more weights than a human, could probably lift the human while the human lifted weights because they're just that much stronger. So they can operate heavy machinery, pick up giant objects. So they're not they're not otherworldly cosmic entities in terms of their physical power, but they're quite formidable and like pack a punch physically, right? So Invincible Mauler twins. Okay, this is Invincible Mauler twins. Let's see if I can find something. Yeah, these guys have much broader shoulders, it looks like. Which is probably a little bit more in line with what I was thinking. Is there a higher resolution of... Hey, look, they've got spider mines, dude. That's crazy. Nah, this is DuckDuckGo, dude. It's not going to show me degenerate shit. I've got safe search on. There are some big men. Yeah, I think this could probably suit us, if I had to guess. As like a general idea. I mean, they would probably be slightly less broad, slightly less wide, and slightly taller, but I don't have like a good, I guess maybe there's like a comparison image of one of these next to a human for scale. I don't know. There's a good image for that. If I go to these guys, dude, they got some smiles. Man, this website is a disaster. Jesus. Popular pages, Monster Girl. Wow, I wonder why. See, this is the problem: is you're not getting any degeneracy until you click on some of these fucking links. What about this? Hulking duo that seeks to rule over the world. Okay, well, yeah, I was hoping for some more images, but unfortunately... Oh, maybe we have some? Oh, I could use my keyboard! Can you get that off my screen? So, oh, no, I guess not. Yeah, they seem to be quite larger than standard human, but... Okay, I mean, this is probably the best image we've seen so far that has some element of this. This might actually be a good size comparison. So yeah, in this case, they probably just need to be a little bit less, like slightly scaled down. So I was thinking of a human that was like 1.25x, and this looks like a little bit more like 1.5x, if that makes any sense. So, okay, we'll keep this image queued up here. I guess I'll copy visuals and then technology. Okay. That seems fine. I guess I'll also grab like a Manhattan image. Because we got to construct these kinds of like mood board style things in order to in order to get like a better understanding of what we've got going on here. I'm not sure. Is there really any... Dude, is this real? This is like somebody's like cosplay or something? I don't know. I know that there was that new Watchmen show, but it seems like I got pranked, TBH. Yeah, I guess this is probably the best image we're gonna get, so I'll grab that as well. What's up, Cabin 197 Russ? Why are the Ancifi blue? To better immediately make them seem different than humans, sending a very clear signal early on that even though these are the most familiar race you're going to see, they're still very different. So yeah, they obviously share a lot of traits culturally or psychologically with humans. They have the element of like expansion, exploration. Like these are things that they obviously are very motivated by or general goals for them. Reminds you of Dane from Wizardry. I haven't even heard of Wizardry at all. So Dane, Wizardry 7. What happens if I look that up? Is there any... Is this him? He's got some horns. Yeah, maybe you can hit me up with some images in DMs or something if you have any lying around. Might be useful. So we have some like key traits that we can put in here. So we would say like obviously broad-shouldered and large. Large is probably pretty pointless, but like 1.25x size of human? Question mark? Something like that. You just have that be there. And then there was obviously like we need them to feel physically imposing based on the strength that they actually have. So I would like to have something very distinct about their faces. I mean, they are sexually dimorphic, so they're going to have males and females, but I imagine that even the woman would be jacked by comparison, just because like that's the baseline of their species, right? So even if like similar gender roles developed historically, that would make total sense, in my opinion. Oh, I see. Here's an image of Dane, of the Dane. Well, they've got some interesting wizard outfits, that's for sure. Yeah, I think the idea of them being like the thing is they're not all as I describe it in here, but they're not like they have like they're very bright blue at the beginning of their lives, and that shades deeper as they get older until it starts getting like more dark and faded. Well, I guess more pale in that sense. Where it looks almost at a glance similar to what they were like when they were born. So it's a nice way to like give you this encapsulation of what they're all about, like their approximation of age when you look at them, because they don't really develop wrinkles in the same way, right? So that's how you would learn about their physical age, just by like some visual storytelling of the race. So in this case, these guys look like they'd probably be a little bit more on the older side if they were that. That's just because the old wizard trope, probably. I can't tell if they're zombies or wizards though. They got some wacky aesthetic. Right, Knight of the Realm. So the idea that I had is that there's the unit in the Terran Arsenal called the Olympian, and the Olympian is supposed to have a melee attack where they just straight up punch people. But that's really only when they're forced into it, right? So similar to what you were just describing, this kind of unit, it wouldn't be called Olympian because there's no human mythology to draw upon. So I have to create my own sort of mythos for each individual race. This is a race that would have mythology and storytelling and folklore, but they would probably, similar to how we do now, they'd probably almost look at it with a dismissive attitude, like, okay, we can draw upon it for name value, but we wouldn't necessarily like put a lot of stock into it, right? Whereas some of the other races might look to their mythos with a bit more reverence. So that being said, whatever the unit would be called would actually fit right in as a maybe a tier 2 infantry unit or something to that effect, where you do have that straight up like in close quarters, I can just rail you because I'm in an exosuit and I'm really fucking strong, something like that, right? So that would make perfect sense, I think, in that context. Obviously, based on the fact that they have weapons that, like guns, rifles, and stuff, they're going to be able to attack from a range that is more effective than charging in melee combat. But they might trend towards shorter range stuff, like it's cheap to say shotguns because obviously shotguns in many cases should or tend to have the capability of range. It's just that in video games, for whatever reason, they don't. But some sort of close quarters weapon or a weapon that just excels in close quarters would be represented in an RTS as just having short range. Something like the Hurakan for the Terrans, the Firebat in Brood War, having short range with the flamethrower. So they might actually just have a proclivity towards that in certain branches where their units tend to prefer the closer quarter environments because that allows them to punch people in the face. It's just satisfying to punch people in the face. Come on. So I think that would make perfect sense. At this point, we have the idea that like because they're like so physically capable, muscled etc. I guess we'll have to figure out something about like divergent facial structure. Need specifics. Okay. So for technology, we haven't really touched too much on that, but we know that we're going to have exosuits for infantry. Trend towards shorter range weapons on infantry. And again, there's going to be some like mid-range or longer range ones or whatever, but this is just to allow for the close quarters stuff that we were just talking about, and I think that's fine. I think these guys would also have a more classical military approach where they probably would have battle tanks of some sorts, maybe some, not hovercraft, but like troop transports, ground and air troop transports. So stuff like an APC or whatever. And I guess the question would be like, would we have them mostly represent their early game strength through infantry? Where like the early game mech or like whatever the branches would look like. Some of the early game ones would be more geared towards utility until they ascend further up the tech tree and start deploying those tanks. Not 100% sure, but that would be one idea where you could get like harassment and transport type units that might have their own armaments, but wouldn't necessarily be alone something to build your entire composition around. Yeah, like, well, I guess wheels would feel, unless you could really heavily protect them, wheels seem a bit difficult to justify. But, I mean, I thought the same thing about treads, and Blizzard had tanks in there, and I guess that doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest. So the question is, like, can you make them out of resilient material? Yeah, probably, because you can make, like, exosuits and the actual tank hulls and stuff. The problem, like, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to even bother worrying about that. That's beyond the scope of the more hyper-realism type thing. But I think, like, starting to come up with their sort of, like, tech tree, right? So we would have, like, early focus on infantry, supportive, and harassment roles for other classes of units. I mean, the question is, like, so this is something that, like, more broadly speaking, we have to figure out about the races in general, but considering we are going to have 100 units on average for every single of what I'm calling regencies currently, but races in more conventional nomenclature, vernacular. The idea is if we have a more constrained early game, is that a bad thing? Because if we're gonna have like obviously like collectively thousands of units in the game, it might actually be nice for the early game to only have so many options, and in that sense go backwards in a way from having the ability to immediately have useful compositions, like well-rounded compositions from every single branch. I guess you don't really have that, though. That might be a false assessment of what we have currently in Cosmonarchy. But I imagine, like, if you just went scrapyards, you could probably get away with just scrapyards in the early game, although it'd be pretty gas intensive and slow. So you'd have to play defensively, I guess. If you just went armor, Goliath, Cyclops, with some vultures for scouting and using up your minerals since they don't cost any gas. That's not a terrible composition, and it would scale when you get those add-ons out. I guess the weakest one is probably Orbital, just because you only have Gorgons and Wraiths, and then otherwise you can transport stuff. But if you have no ground units to transport because you didn't tech into any of those branches, then it's obviously not very useful. So, what's up, Hoop Thrower? Yeah, faction is not very useful for me because it's so generic that I'm not interested in it, which is why I've called them something else. Originally it was kingdom, but that obviously was inaccurate, just like race is inaccurate, because some I'm referring to them as regencies for now. That might change in the future if I find a more suitable term. But each regency, each civilization, each government, each race, each faction has multiple actual races and maybe some like multiple governments and stuff associated with it. So kingdom doesn't really work, even though I like the idea that it ties in with Cosmonarchy as the title. It's not very accurate, and it would probably just cause confusion. I think regency is pretty suitable as a current word for it. But the other thing logistically is deciding whether or not you like. I think for this doesn't really work for all races, but for example, the Ember Seat would have the opportunity to, like, as part of their tech progression, it would probably just be summoning help from one of the other member nations, which would grant you like 10 units or something to use in combat. And that would, in that case, they probably wouldn't be tiers in the same way. Like, they would be branches, and you would get access to like this faction or this, I guess, race, right? This people, the civilization that's a member nation of the Ember Seat that occupies a tier or whatever. So, like, these guys only have really expensive units, and they only have really powerful units or something. So you call upon them when you're like as part of your like high, your ascension up to like tech tree levels 5 or something. You know what I mean? There's ideas for that, for as far as like more factional things go. Don't know how we'll actually figure that out, but I imagine a lot of the like certain races are going to have some significantly different methods of assembling and ascending up their tech tree and assembling like certain elements of their infrastructure. So obviously, I don't think it's possible with this many races, but I wanted one of the ideas that I wanted to push was a unique way of even constructing bases for each race. I think a lot of them will be either the classical Terran approach or the classical Protoss approach, where Terrans marry a worker to the construction and Protoss just self-build. I think a lot of them will probably fall into one of those two categories because those are fairly universal. However, there's probably going to be a little bit of an added something to separate that, where maybe one of them is self-build but drains money over time instead of instantaneously. Not sure. I mean, that might end up feeling too gimmicky. We'll see. Obviously, another one that you're going to be able to do is the Command and Conquer style, where it builds over time and then you deploy it all at once. So it's not even on the map to be quote unquote engaged with until it's playing its construction or its deployment animation, really. And then during that deployment animation, which is probably going to be longer than in Command and Conquer. So it's probably like 5-10 seconds or something instead of 1 or 2 or whatever it was in those games. That's when you can interact with it to beat it up or whatever. There's a number of different options that we have for stuff like that. And then obviously we have to figure out how to balance all of these against each other. What's up, Mage? Yeah, I think after you get past like 5 or 6 or some small single digit number, anything further would require really gimmicking the method of construction. So that's why I was kind of going for the and the same in many ways probably goes for progression through tech trees, but that doesn't mean that there's not other ways for me to apply some very unique element of gameplay that is sourced from the origin of the race and the lore, the back history or whatever backstory of the race. So yeah, the thing that I was talking about is like, do we commit to the idea that at least some factions don't really have the opportunity to deploy well-rounded compositions of every single branch? Do we reevaluate the branch approach in the first place? I think it's a good idea to keep branches separate for now, especially since we have plans to have so many units. I guess the other thing that I should consider is whether or not it really matters if each race has the same. I think each race should probably have the same quantity of units, but that's only because, in my mind, quantity of distinct units refers to is directly like it correlates to how many options you have to engage with, like how many strategies you have, basically, and how many different playstyles you can support. So if you only have 10 units, then you probably don't have that many playstyles, in my mind. But I suppose it is technically possible, depending on combinations of composition. But the idea that you're going to be able to compete if you have 50 units versus somebody who has 100, well, you can compete, but it's going to be a lot more homogenous and less. It supports less overall playstyles. Yeah, for sure, Balefal. The idea of unique abilities or unique, what you call it, properties, but I would just say like ways of interacting with the unit or the ways the unit interacts with its surroundings definitely has a has a lot of help. I think it does go a long way. Like for example, the Rosellium. I was thinking we were obviously like the simulacra idea of splitting upon receiving damage. That could refer to an entire branch of the Rosellium. You'll notice that a lot of the unit concepts that I already have come up with for Cosmonarchy, they're not going to their counterpart because there's not really a direct corollary. Like, I guess Ansifi are a reasonable corollary to Terrans, and I guess Orlithray are a reasonable corollary to Zerg, but not really. Like, there's a lot of significant differences there. So, a lot of concepts are going to be reevaluated and modified and moved around. So we probably have like a couple of if you took all the units from Cosmonarchy, you probably have a couple of them that will be dispersed between a couple of different races. You know what I mean? There's also definitely going to be overlap in terms of what a unit does. And it'll be almost kind of like the shared units system that I developed for Cosmonarchy towards the later stages of its development, where you have the Shadow branch for Terran that involves units that the other races can also build to some capacity, where Aspirants are a shared unit between Terran and Protoss, and Cohort is shared between Zerg and Terran, that sort of stuff. That stuff will take place, but it's not really going to be shared from a unit standpoint so much as it is this unit will serve some similar purpose between races. So you would have a unit that acts as a Maverick does for Ansifi, and as a Maverick does, but also for another faction like Ember Siege or something. So you would have a number of different factions that have similar roles being fulfilled by, again, distinct units with their own unit responses and their own identities, their own visuals, that sort of thing. So it's not going to be going down the Age of Empires route where like a lot of factions feel very derivative of one another. And really the only thing that sets them apart beyond maybe some artistic stuff is oftentimes like the general bonuses that you get. By and large, predominantly, the factions will feel very distinct, but the ways that similar unit concepts and combat roles will be satisfied is more so like they'll be differentiated by way of like the same kind of unit in a completely different composition with completely different other units surrounding it has a different impact, obviously. And that was the original argument behind the shared branches as well, is if you have a unit that has double regeneration as a passive, or increased healing as a passive or whatever, and you put it in a faction that has a lot of native healing, like Terrans, then obviously that has a very different protocol than like, okay, that's passive healing from Terrans, and Zerg is more active healing where it's positional based. And so these two things, the things that interact with that unit from different races are obviously going to result in different compositions being viable or useful with that particular unit. And that's kind of what I was getting at with that whole spiel. So you're going to get to see like a unit that acts kind of similar to a Maverick in combat strength or in combat role for a multiple of units, right? Marine in Brood War. That kind of unit will be present for a large number of regencies, but it interacts with the surroundings, the other tech tree elements very differently. So you'll still have some meaningful distinctions even when there are some overlap or whatever. And part of that is just because some of these concepts work really well for well-rounded compositions, or you need a unit that can attack both air and ground in the early game so that you can actually have some hope of defeating a variety of enemies. And there's only so many concepts for units that attack both air and ground. There's a lot of them, but there's only so many that can do that and also can exist in the early game without feeling very, very powerful or very, very weak, right? So you gotta, like, with such a constriction on what needs to be there from the game design perspective, that is going to necessarily constrain my options from a conceptual standpoint. But I still think the audio visuals will help to set those up very differently, set them apart. And again, the nearby, like the surrounding units that you build around those are going to be pretty nice too. Should help, for example, when you're trying to deal with something like multiple races have battle tanks or something to that effect, then one tank looking and feeling and sounding very different, even if it serves a similar combat role, even if it even has similar stats, is definitely going to help set it apart. Plus, all of the different kinds of units around it. If you're putting a battle tank on a faction that has a lot of other ranged units, or a lot of other ranged mechanical units specifically, that's going to feel very different than if you put a battle tank in a faction that has a ton of melee units, like swarming melee units, and these are just strong outliers compared to the other units that they have. So that's going to be pretty cool, I think. And now I will make myself a drink, so I will mute myself for just a moment. All right. We are epic. So back to reality. Talking about an early focus on infantry. For now, we'll go with this, and I'll figure out whether or not I want to allow fruitful specialization to multiple branches for all races, all regencies, or if that's only going to be a trait of some specific regencies, or if that's even going to be an approach at all. So we decided the NCF are going to focus on infantry early on, and they will have some roles that are a bit more specialized, or at least a bit less general, for units that are trained out of the equivalent of like a factory or a starport or even a scrapyard or something to that effect. Anything that's another class of unit, like be it a walker or a tank or a mech of some other form, or an airship or spacecraft. Even a support drone, which is something you could probably classify the shaman as. Stuff like that would be probably non-combatant, or if it was a combatant, it would be more harassment-oriented, like the Vulture. The Vulture's kind of a weird unit where it's like a combination of harassment and map control with the mines. So something to that effect could obviously be present. So let's think about what else we have for tech tree. So because there's the early focus on infantry, I have a feeling that specifically for infantry, we're going to have a lot of units in exosuits. We talked about them having shorter range weapons on infantry, which means we're probably going to include, maybe not a flamethrower specifically, but some sort of like crowd control unit that has to get a little bit closer than the average unit. I was also thinking about, like, there's the classic archetype of the battle, like, not a literal tank from a vehicular sense, but a tank from the combat role sense where it's absorbing a lot of damage. Some sort of frontline unit. And I think one way to set these guys apart would probably be to make it so that whatever, if they do have some sort of infantry support unit that does healing, making it also double as a tank type unit. So this unit being on the front line would probably be pretty interesting insofar as positioning them in front of the enemies would be optimal. But I don't actually know if that would make sense from like a... They would probably need some sort of attack and to passively disperse healing, which is a bit more difficult to imagine working, because any sort of passive healing like that that's based on position or whatever, that would obviously... the Shaman is an example of that. That's a more dedicated unit role, though. So maybe there would just be a unit that's more on the line of like, oh yeah, we need... Hold on one sec. More like we need a very different approach to how the healing would even take place. So. Yeah, like sort of jetpack type troopers or whatever. Or I think there was a unit in Command and Conquer 2 that just could fly, but I might be misremembering something. Or it could fly, but only if it like... Yeah. I think there was a jet trooper of some sort that could fly, but like its controls were really annoying because you had to like double right click or something to make them fly. And sometimes they just wouldn't listen to you. I think that was in Command & Conquer 2. But I don't remember. Yeah. Bailiff. I was thinking something based on their attack, so you would want to position them to attack. That did feel a little bit similar to the Apostle concept, but the Apostle is just flat healing based on like a small range around the target, around the victim, instead of like healing the specific user of the, or specific attacker. So I guess we would probably want this unit to be... So we could go about a unit concept like that two different ways. We could make it so that the frontline melee healer, the frontline medic type unit, has very high attack speed, so that they can mark a unit with healing very quickly. I think that's probably a bad idea, though, for a reason I'll get into in a minute. The other way we could do it is have them have very like remarkably lower attack speed compared to the average unit. And that would give more opportunities for other units to proc the ability, but also mean that they could be like outrun or kited or something, and then that wouldn't be massively difficult. Remember that these units are not, or the Ansifi infantry are not going to be particularly fast, because they as a race are more slow moving. So I guess exosuits could probably help with that, but they would probably be low armored if they were mobile, which is a pretty common trend in general. So, I guess like so we have like specific unit concepts that we can start to write down. So the reason why the slow attack speed works better than the fast attack speed that I was thinking is that if it has a fast attack, the frontline medic would just heal itself the whole time. So I think slow attack and also like low damage, generally speaking, is probably the way to go for that unit, where it's not massively self-sufficient. So yeah, that's probably a good idea. The trouble is if it's not a high raw damage unit, then obviously that's a good move from a balance standpoint if your goal is to create a unit that's not massively self-sufficient, that can't heal itself for a lot of damage, but it also kind of flies in contrast to the heavy hitting element. And I do kind of want to push that. So maybe the frontline medic would be a pretty scary unit by itself, just because if it successfully took a hit, if it successfully procced a heal mark, it would heal for a decent amount of damage. Like, as an imaginary example, if it's dealing like 10 damage per hit, which is pretty high for like a base unit, assuming we're following through with StarCraft style stats, where the Maverick had 40 HP as an example, then it's healing for 10 damage. Or maybe it's like healing for half damage or something. Like, Not a trivial amount of damage healed. It's just that if its attack speed is slow enough, it's probably fine. And I think melee attacks in general will probably be fairly slow if you think about it, because yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense actually. Melee attacks would be slow because the race is slow, but if they're using a weapon, then they're only as slow as the weapon is, which makes a lot more sense from a agile perspective. Yeah, low damage makes sense, but it makes sense from a design standpoint, but not from a race design standpoint. Good for game design, not very much for the Ancifes traits as a species, as a civilization. So, I think the other thing I was thinking of just now is it might be one of those like 1-2 punch things where it would have to be every other attack or every initial attack onto a unit. Well, I guess it would just be every alternative attack. They alternate between two separate weapons, and the first one can be used from a bit of a farther range. Yeah, I think that might actually be interesting because then you can actually hold position in front of a unit that's also like low range or something, and then they won't actually melee. So the idea that I had in my head was like you tag it and then you can attack, and the tag is low damage. The melee attack is way lower in terms of capacity, like way lower attack speed. So the tag for marking the target deals maybe no damage actually, but their actual general attack would be like a follow up or something. So they would have to. So I guess that if I didn't want it to do damage, then it probably wouldn't make sense for it to be an attack, like take up an attack animation. Because then that would be pretty clunky if you didn't actually want to heal, but you had to waste an animation to attack. So maybe it's just that any attack marks the target. But I did kind of like the idea of like maybe a low damage attack that also marks them with healing. And then the frontline medic can then like club them over the head or something to get its health back. Yeah, all melee attacks will be dodgeable. We just have to figure out what's going on with that. Basically, it would collide with. It would be a collision rate, an area of collision, and it would damage the first unit that it hit, the closest unit to the source of the collision. If it was capable of cleaving or dealing area damage, then that would also happen. But for the most part, like a zealot attack, for example, if we had a zealot in this, that would be the case there. So the other thing is, this is something that I was always going back and forth with as a guiding principle as to whether or not to adopt. But the idea that I had was there are oftentimes going to be literal upgrades of units, and this is something that's present in Cosmonarchy, although it's a little bit less than it probably should be, because we have limited numbers of units. When you ascend to another tech tree, you are going to get access to things like Maverick 2.0, a unit that's literally just a better Maverick. Now, maybe it has a different passive, maybe it has a different ability, like the Madcap doesn't have a stim pack, but it does have that wind up over time. Statistically, it's a better Maverick, though. It's also more expensive and requires a separate structure to train. Now, all of these things are different elements that we can apply costs to units. So these are essentially better versions of an existing unit. They fill similar combat roles. They might have some nuances that are different, like the Madcap versus the Maverick argument, or the Olympian versus the Madcap, even. Obviously, the Olympian's a bit different. It's a bit more straightforward in terms of DPS, and has some significantly different abilities. But yeah, I'm thinking the Ancifi would manifest this by having a tier 1 or 1.5 or something, like a low tier version of the frontline medic infantry unit. And that slowly but surely evolves with a upgrade, like a new version, a 2.0 version of that unit that hits harder or maybe is able to proc multiple, like has multiple charges per attack of the marking, and generally performs better. So you could actually rush to a like if you hit a fast tier 3 or something breakpoint, whatever this imaginary 2.0 frontline medic is, that kind of unit would could be used in conjunction with tier 1 units specifically because it's more of a supportive unit, but would perform a lot better and thus morph the composition. Like, it would be very strong just to upgrade that one element of your army. And again, I'm using upgrade, as Luciferius so kindly points out. I'm not using upgrade in the sense of you're researching an inalienable advantage. It's more that you've ascended to a higher tier of tech, and now you can build a unit that is superior. You would still be able to build the original unit, but that's where having multiple production structures comes in. Or maybe it won't be something like that. Maybe it would be similar to the add-on system where you gain access to a different add-on and that replaces the other unit or something. I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not even sure if... I don't think add-ons will be a race, like a unique trait to a single regency. I have a feeling that Ansifi might use them, but they won't. If they do, they aren't the only race that or regency that will use them. Okay, early focus on infantry, supportive harassment roles of other classes of units. We'll jump into the frontline medic concept. So this would be like a tanky support unit. Marks targets with so I guess marks attacked units with a heal that is consumed upon being attacked again. And then this would be a stack healing the attacker. Low attack speed, moderate damage, melee range, single target. So I guess we would say tier 1. This is probably where instead of like cleric or something, we would have a very different unit name for this. We definitely want to stray far away from any sort of naming convention that would be related to like direct mythology. So more like generic, if you will, non-specific words like cleric or shaman, even witch doctor, some shit like that, over something that is like a specific mythological element or historical element, because I have to take the same approach I took to Protoss back in the day when I was renaming all of their units. Not in the sense that I'm going to be using Latin or whatever, but in the sense that I can't rely on mythology or history because humans don't exist in this setting. So it wouldn't make any sense for a unit named Olympian to exist for any race, let alone the race that's the most similar to humans. The mark's the only source of healing. Yeah, I think they will be the only source of healing, but there will like for this unit, but there will be many other ways to heal your army. So there would be a shaman type unit, I imagine, as in shaman from the current Terran thing. Well, obviously, I'm not going to be using healer. That's an action verb. Technical terms in general are just lame. But if they sound suitable, then that would be fine. It's just that this is like literally like a fucking like melee guy who just beats you over the head to force you to heal his buddies. So it's not really like a heal. It's not a conventional healer whatsoever. If anything, he would have a very aggressive name, I imagine. But we'll see. More of a brute than anything. Yeah, I think the heal will be pretty noticeable, but I haven't figured that one out yet. These guys, I mean, they're tier 1. They're not going to be very expensive. So the idea is that you can pretty easily like mass a decent number of them. Chirurgeon is sounds like a pretty dumb word, to be honest. I can't believe that's even real. Yeah, yeah. He extracts your will to live and bestows it upon his allies. Yeah, I think maybe finding the thing is martial arts are all named like they're all human constructs as well, but some sort of like brawler or a name that that invokes the idea of somebody who is a martial arts, maybe not master. In this case, it would be more of an initiate. But somebody who's like practicing some sort of martial art makes a lot of sense. It's just that we can't use like fucking, I don't know, taekwondo or something, because that's human specific. But the idea of martial arts would definitely be played up, I think, in a lot of the NCFI concepts. I guess I should probably throw down some of the other ideas I have in general, but Regencies. So for the only other thing that I just will quickly use as a digression is for the Kolopo Azos, I'm pretty sure their town center is going to be called the Mouth of Madness, or just Mouth of Madness, obviously. But that would be pretty epic to see, to be honest. And that's a reference I don't even mind making, because it, even if you just take it at face value and you're not familiar with Mouth of Madness, like what that actually is, it still sounds like it's appropriate, because the mouth is also used to describe the start of something, or the origin point, or the front, or whatever. It's quite accurate for that race. So obviously we need like a standard issue rifleman. I don't know what that means. Maverick actually makes perfect sense in this context, so tier 1 standard issue rifleman. The question of whether or not we keep the stim pack, don't know. We might also move the medic role, the healing aspect of this. We might also replace it with an enchantment style thing, where instead of healing the attacker, they provide the stim pack bonus. That could be kind of interesting, where then we can move healing to some other combat role. Even though I like the idea that they literally beat their enemies to heal, but it being low attack speed, like that's a point that Night of the Realm made. Obviously, it definitely does have a less immediate impact or less consistent impact, perhaps for healing specifically. I guess it's also kind of difficult to know like which unit is going to get the stims. So it might be more of we're probably gonna have to retool that idea a lot, where it's like when a unit attacks it, they get um they get a stim pack, a very reduced stim pack type bonus, and that happens for all units that attack that target. Uh, and it maybe stacks up or something. I don't know. Could also be one of those things like Adrenal Frenzy for the Nathricor, where when the unit dies, it stacks Disperse to all allies. But that would make it more inclined towards melee instead of it being more about whoever's attacking it getting the bonus. So we'll have to figure that one out. I think it punishes you for too frequent use just by reducing your HP more. Maybe more than you can afford. Move this out of the way of the chat so you guys can actually read that a bit more. I think a lot of the unit names that I settle on are going to be a like whatever English word I end up using will probably be almost a code name for the unit that later on will get replaced with an original name for that race's language or whatever. The toughest part about that I imagine Night of the Realm is visualizing how far along some units are relative to others. And like keeping track of that information as a player would be pretty difficult. Also, especially since I would only put stim packs on units that die easily, I don't imagine it actually being that impactful. I guess a scaling stim would be more useful, or it would be a more appropriate inclusion on tougher units that have more health. But I don't imagine it would be very easy to understand intuitively looking at it what's going on there. So I don't know about that one. Like obviously all of the things that are invisible in Cosmonarchy are there because we don't have assets for them, not because I intend for them to be invisible. So there is that to consider. But yeah, I don't think Adept sells the concept. Again, it'll probably have to be very specific. The other tough part to consider is that since we are trending towards shorter range weapons on infantry, we have to figure out what we're doing about the fact that they also have low speed. Normally, you put low speed on high range, so they don't have as much of a burden for repositioning. But if they're short range and they have no immediate gap close, that might be a tough ask. So maybe that could be the enchantment from the frontline frontline martial artist, or whatever we end up calling it. Might be that units simply are able to move faster towards the marked targets or something. Yeah, it could be that as well. That would be a little bit more scalable as well, since it really is about the instead of a stack that's consumed upon attacking and that being very variable, this way it's much more consistent. So let's just say slows attacked units. The movement speed of attack units. As in pulling you to the target. That's, well, yeah, we need gap closers for a decent amount of the infantry here because of the close quarters and the trend towards low range and the trend towards low speed. That might even be one of those things that we allow for a higher tier version of the frontline martial artist. Lets you move in pretty close there. Would make a lot of sense. Well, I just imagine the idea that like we can scale up any since we have the we're going by the design edict that there are going to be, while there's going to be plenty of unique concepts or like unlocking a tier, like say you go to tier 3 or tier 4, a lot of the units you unlock are going to be more than just levels up over your opponents or over what you previously had. They're going to be more than the upgraded 2.0 versions of units, right? Some of them are going to be completely new to that. Like they start at that tech level and then they scale up from there. And then obviously there's going to be some really crazy end game stuff. However, with the idea that a decent number or a non-trivial amount of the units that you get at tier 1 and so on are going to have superior versions further up the tech tree, any concept we come up with can be scaled up in power or in power budget. So we're talking about the idea of gap closing, being able to just home in on a specific target. That would be probably breakpoint, say breakpoint 2. So the 2.0 version of the martial artist could have that. Or maybe it's the 3.0 version, whatever the case may be. Then some amount of versions later, we could have a version that pulls themselves to the target and brings with it all of its nearby allies, just passively in an aura. That would be a very powerful inclusion, where it's, you position that unit in a field of other close range units, and suddenly you get to gap close your whole army, or maybe a small group of your army, because I imagine the range would be quite small. Golem is used non-specifically to refer to any sort of soulless automaton. It's the same idea as an automaton, basically. I think most of the time people use it to refer to automatons that aren't robotic. I'm just using it interchangeably with automaton, basically. But the idea is that it's not like an engineered piece of machinery, the same way like a robot would be, or an android or something. But I am aware that it has origins in Jewish mythology. A lot of words do. It's just that language has evolved since then. Thankfully, because golem is a pretty epic word. Isn't it Haagen-Dazs? It's not even pronounced the same way, noob. I think they have accents over their shit too, because they're like German or something. That's pretty funny. Well, it's a class of creatures in Jewish mythology, but it doesn't. It's not just that. There's a ton of words that I would not be able to use if they were removed from my vocabulary just because they happened to have a mythological root or were used to describe something mythological. Golem also refers to just a concept or class of some kind of entity. I'm actually surprised you haven't read this document, Hoop, since you're all about tech trees and factions. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to note was their presumed movement speed. We could say scales with scaling potential. Gap close. And then we might have some other ideas for them. There are also probably going to be, like... Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how aggressive we'll use that scaling thing where units just gain, like, replacement versions of themselves at higher tiers. Oh yeah, it's not even spelled the same way. Dude, I thought I was like violating copyright or something. It would have been pretty sad because Mackerel DOS sounds pretty epic. Mm. We got a lot of concepts to come up with, obviously. I was just trying to find like units that I already have concepts for somewhat fleshed out and tried to figure out like what could be applied, like from what race could these, or what recipient race would it benefit the most from them. Bit easier for me to figure that out for the NCFI because we've actually written down a lot of like the basic stuff here, so. There's definitely going to be an Olympian and a Heracles and probably a Madcap. I don't know about the attack speed increase or whatever because again, I don't even know about Stimpack on the Maverick for the NCFI. Mostly because just being able to activate that on a whim, even if it does have a punishment associated with it or a cost associated with it, feels pretty awkward. I think Desir in general will be like, so we should probably write down like we'll say like higher than average HP, maybe slightly higher than average durability, lower than average mobility. A while ago, I came up with a concept for like trying to do a mathematical concept almost, or like a pie chart concept for, oh, it was Venn diagram, I think. That's what I was trying to use. So the concept I had was like, me working to come up with like how to formalize balancing a unit for an RTS. And so you had the idea of like survivability was a combination of vitals and mobility or agility or whatever you'd want to call that. And then there was like there was some blanket term that combined vitals and power or damage, I guess, which was like it was probably just like power or something. And then there was some term for damage and mobility as well. Basically, I had like this whole thing where I had settled everything down to specific um like abilities and stuff like that, like settled everything down so that if you were trending towards the middle where you had really good elements of all of these, then that would increase the cost of the unit and the place in tech tree it ought to be if you wanted to maintain balance. So basically, like the better a unit was at a significant number of the things that you had, the higher tier it should be, lest it be overpowered. And obviously, in some cases, if there's absolutely no weaknesses, like I guess carriers in Brood War or battle cruisers in Brood War might be an example. If the only way to defeat it is to scout it ahead of time, then it's not very interactive. Well, the armor system in Cosmonarchy is going to be very different than the armor system in Brood War. We are still going to have weapon types that deal more damage, but the way that we're achieving that is through a penetration system. So you gain a certain amount of armor pen as a concussive attack. A concussive attack gains more armor pen when targeting light armored units, would be an example. So it would deal bonus damage instead of it dealing reduced damage to other things. That way we balance around the least amount of damage you are going to do, and then in certain breakpoints or against certain compositions, you're going to deal more damage. The other thing is, you might have just a high base armor pen. Now, I think base weapon armor pen, I still haven't decided how I want to do this because obviously we have to see the math and how it feels. But base weapon armor pen, I think I have this written down in the Trello, which will take a moment to load. Yeah, well, I didn't actually document it too much, I guess. So the idea that I had in mind anyway was that if you could balance a unit that deals reduced damage, well, not reduced damage, that deals low base damage and give it high armor pen so that it always deals at least that much damage. So you, for example, you would have the Eidolon or Ghost in Brood War. That unit has 10 base damage. If it was in the new system, it would probably have like 5 base damage, but deal, because of the game rule of concussive dealing, like penetrating armor. Well, I guess it could deal 10 damage anyway, but not penetrate armor against targets that were not light, as would be an example. But if it had innate armor pen associated with it, then it would ignore armor. Now, I don't know if armor pen would translate. I don't think armor pen translates to bonus damage by itself. It's more that. Yeah, I'm starting to remember a bit more of the idea here. Unfortunately, I only documented this in like ancient DMs with Veek, so I don't fully remember all of this stuff. I should have explained it more. I probably do have some sort of design documentation of it somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Oh, no, that's not it. Okay. So the idea was that in case of armor, you have Eidolon, 10 base damage, concussive, ignore 2 armor. These are just basic numbers. Ignore 2 armor of light attackers, 1 of medium, 0 of large, or maybe heavy, titanic. And then 2 armor pen. So it has 2 armor pen base. Now, in this case, the damage is always 10. Then it gets reduced by any armor that is not negated by the armor pen. So if you have a phalanx or siege tank with 2 armor, I think it has 1 in default. Now, when the Eidolon v phalanx battle happens, we do 10 damage to the phalanx, minus 2 to the armor, plus 2 because of the armor pen, and we get 0 against heavy or titanic, or it also ignores 1 of medium, and phalanx is medium normal. We'll say it's like phalanx, 2 armor, large size, or heavy size. So just for the sake of argument. So now what you have is Eidolon's always dealing full damage to phalanxes, but if you had a highly armored light unit, then you would have 2 armor pen plus 2 armor. So we would say like, I don't know, elite maverick, 5 armor light class. Then we would have Eidolon v elite maverick, 10 minus 5 plus 2 plus 2. So in this case it would be plus 0. So that's kind of how the system would work. So this obviously means we have to redesign every single damage value, which is probably why it's why it's probably a good thing that we're only implementing this system in a new game instead of having to go through the rigmarole of designing everything else. Although I still would have been fine with a system that allowed us to explore different things. All right, Balefalls, hit me with some names here. Fwata sounds pretty interesting, I guess. I have no idea how, I guess that would be Kex Cha or something. I don't remember what the, because I know that little accent over the S is Sha, but I don't know about C. My problem with using non-English characteristics, or whatever the characters are of English that are called, I guess that would just be like Germanic or something. What that not using that alphabet is bad form in my mind, because the other alphabets only exist for human races, or human species rather, that, or fucking species. This turned into eugenics real quick accidentally. It only exists for humans, basically, of other cultures. So I would never want to do that, because like I'm not trying to imply that aliens are using those letters. But I guess if you're coming at it from a linguistic perspective and you're including humans, then that would be like the human name for the aliens, and the only way to make the sounds necessary to be similar enough to the aliens would be to use those characters or something. I don't know. It just seems like a mess. And also the idea of like only naming the race after what the humans can pronounce or something feels reductive. But that's just my take. So that being said, I have no actual idea how to pronounce most of the ones that have all three of the ones that seem to have Germanic characters or whatever, non-English characters. But then you have Skest and Vruan. Yeah, I know Dasha, for example, is like a common name, but it's like DAS, whatever that character is, A. Good to know. I honestly had no idea. I should definitely spend a bit more time studying linguistics, but there's only so much one man can do, you know what I mean? I am feeling the pain. The limitations of a single man. Yeah, I'm not even going to bother trying to explain why everybody speaks in English when humans don't even exist. I think it's very clear that in a setting with no humans, people speaking in English is just there so that that humans who are playing the game, like it's a meta thing, humans that are playing the game can interface with the game. That's the only reason why everybody speaks English. There will be some cases where communication is not possible or not easy, and in those situations, the language that those specific aliens that are impossible or difficult to communicate with will not be speaking English. They will just be, it might as well be fucking noise for all of that. Yeah, and I also think that like this goes back to hyper realism as a talking point or a discussion point. Um, the what do you call it? The whole concept of hyper realism dictates that since you're literally making art or a media, whatever you're doing, you're producing content for humans. So like for an audience, you're not producing like content that should be realistic, because realistic would defeat the purpose or harm the purpose of it being content consumed by a human audience. So that's like essentially the main pillar of what I describe to be hyperrealism. I guess I should probably look into that a little bit more to see if that's the agreed upon definition. But what I'm getting at there anyway is the idea that like when you're so Netherrealm says that visual design is more important than like linguistics or language or whatever. That's true. And the other thing that's more important than making sure that the language makes the correct sounds with the human specific like characters, in my opinion, is making sure that there's character present in whatever name and proper nouns you end up deciding on for a specific faction or for a specific alien species. So when I'm designing the regencies of Xibalba, I'm trying to come up with names that have a lot of phonetic power, and in that sense, that also kind of give you an idea of how complex the race is, or how um, some characteristics about it. And that's why a lot of these names are probably going to change over time. Like maybe Ensifi is too mystical for what these guys actually are. I'm not sure. I think it's probably fine currently. Um, Keltar feels pretty solid as like this. We are Keltar or whatever the fuck. So you'd get like people who are just very brutish. Like that seems appropriate. Githroven is a little bit like very flowy, and that makes sense for them as well. Makral Das is like a very harsh combination of two things, where one is clearly in front of the other. The Makrolons are the superior race, so it would make sense that that would be the name of the regency. I guess Rune sounds a little bit hoity-toity, but it's short and to the point, and that describes the Rune, in my opinion. We scroll through these and we see like maybe some more of the race names need to be fucked around with to be to imply more about what they actually are. But the bottom line is, if you can have that memorable element where you're communicating clearly, there's distinctions, and to some degree it's easy, or at least there's not too many things that are not easy, because obviously like the Orlithrae have like these impossible to pronounce names, like what was the or Bothroleth was one of them, I remember, and then there's like Orlitoskoth, or I guess it would be Orlitoskoth. But either way, like shit like that, like they've got those impossible names. That's like what I renamed the Zerg into, right? Is Thratholeth and stuff like that. So they've got these ridiculous names, but the more you learn about them, the easier they are to pronounce. So eventually you get there. And them being like that is supporting the pillar of hyperrealism that involves setting them apart in a very distinct but meaningful way, where they have that trait and very few other races are going to have like significant numbers of units that are impossible to pronounce initially. Yeah, I don't know what the term is for English characters. If it's Latin characters, I guess that probably makes sense and sounds correct. Anyway, all that aside, I forget where we were or what we were doing before, but I will leave this on the screen for a moment while I use the bathroom, and then when I come back, uh, we can smash some more progress. BRB. Sup, homies? You actually. Welcome. We were constructing a brief mood board style thing and some key traits for the Ansifi. Different elements of what their tech trees are going to be all about. So guiding principles for what they are, like essentially things that I will use to design their stuff. The other thing that I should write down is like general. While several units are unique to specific tiers, many will gain 2.0, well, incremental versions, improved versions at various tech tier breakpoints. I definitely think trap making and stuff sounds pretty useful. The mackerel DOS are going to be quite scrappy, and they're going to be more like clever almost. So you'll probably be able to see that kind of gameplay come out of them. But they're not the only ones who will be doing any trap laying and that sort of thing. That was obviously always a classically Terran idea with Spider-Mines that I tried to explore more elaborately in Cosmonarchy with the Brood War mod with Eidolons having the lobotomy mine, and then maybe the idea of other elements. Trying to think if there's any other each race is guiding print tech tree design principles are not exact or necessarily unique. They will serve as a boundaries or concepts. Okay, so I just wanted to add that little bit of note for myself. What else we got here? So I was also thinking, like, if we did mackerel DOS tech tree, and then we did something like we know that we want swarming low tier, expensive yet powerful mid high tier, dichotomy shows the disparity between the two races of the mackerel DOS, and what else? Predilection for espionage manifests in utility, harassment, disruption abilities. Okay. Yeah, I was just explaining my armor pen system that'll be present in the full game of Cosmonarchy. Basically, the idea that I had for armor pen was, in so many words, was penetration dictates how much armor can be ignored, but will not increase damage if the armor is already effectively 0. So if you have a unit that deals 10 damage and has 5 armor pen against a specific target, and the target only has 2 armor pen, you're not getting more damage for attacking that. You just deal full damage, basically. And this will be my way of having weapon types that still deal different things depending on armor classes, but without relying on percentages. Everything will be flat. Joke thrower, actually. Yeah, percentages are just junk from a design standpoint. Unfortunately, they're not very intuitive. Even in the case where you have some sort of system that is like, oh, this takes by half, which is like the most intuitive percentage. You still have to make that calculation for every single unit on an independent basis. Something that heals by half or deals damage by half or whatever value you're dividing by is not constant. So you have to. It's just really, really difficult to intuit something like that. And as considering all the races we're going to have and all of the different elements that we're going to have in terms of like race specific, they're called regencies for now, regency specific elements, we do need a set of consistent game rules that apply to every race the same way. If we don't have something like that, the sheer number of units that we do have is going to overwhelm people like never before. I think I have to fix my camera now because I just noticed that this was... Oh, it's not that bad, actually. But yeah. There were some other general points we went through earlier. So we know that there's a tiered system, an incremental system for units, where not every unit concept is unique, which has already been initiated in Cosmonarchy with things like Maverick into Madcap, but be a little bit more widespread in this since we have so many units. So I guess we could actually note that we have an average of 100 units per race. And again, those are Regency. What else do we have? We know that we are doing constant. Yeah, so gameplay constants. Oops. If I hit, I guess I have a line character selected and it didn't tell me that's Notepad for you. All right. So building construction varies from race or between regencies, but not every regency is unique in this aspect. I know we talked about building construction styles. Just the above is also true for tech tree progression, as different styles will be present between regencies. I think that's pretty much everything. Tech tree design principles are sometimes overlap between regencies and unit concepts. The human building style is the same thing as the Terran one, besides the fact that you have team building. I'm not really sure if I like it, just because scalability, speaking in terms of scalability, it's difficult to know how much more resources you're draining with team building. Like, it's always some weird fractional value that depends on the structure and the number of workers. And then yeah, there's like other weird stuff. That's the only unique thing about humans in Warcraft 3, I'm pretty sure, though. It's just the team building. It will probably be like a higher tier worker perk or something that higher tier workers can team build, but lower tier ones can't. Something like that. Well, that's just because Blizzard doesn't really know what they're doing with pathfinding and just have that random shit. That's not going to be present in Cosmonarchy. It probably will be more like humans in that respect instead of them just spinning around. I guess team building workers might actually spin around a bit to give the impression that they're like swarming the structure or whatever. I guess Rosellium construction will probably be I think Rosellium construction will probably be built on site with nanobots, with uncontrollable nanobots that travel there. So there's not really a worker that constructs stuff. That it's probably going to be queued from like a town center or something. But yeah, in my mind, I wasn't conceptualizing the randomized paths of the Mason or SCV as the way that I would use the Ansifi construction or whatever, like adapting worker-based construction instead of auto building is not going to involve having random shit like that happen that you don't have precise control over. Right, yeah. It blocks adjacent build spaces. It also is random, usually. Like, you can't tell it to trend towards one side or something, which would actually give you some precision. Yeah, there's just... I don't find it very valuable. I guess the Mackerel Dace would make sense for them to have. Right now, I'll just put in single worker, but I feel like they might actually like benefit from team building because they have that swarming aspect, and it might just be that their structures. So one way that I think team building could work is if it doesn't drain more resources, but it does. It takes more workers, and the base build times are high. So sneaking one worker to do something, like basically to get enough workers to team build on something, you would need a lot of workers, and doing that with a lot of with a lot of workers means you're mining with less workers for, again, like maybe smaller amounts of time or whatever. But you kind of maybe get what I'm saying there. I think that makes a lot of sense. So maybe in this case we could do that. So we would do team worker, and then I'll just add a note of slow base build times. I'm not sure how I would go about sorting all of this information when I start filling it out over here. I think I'll probably have paragraphs instead of these bulleted point lists, and then just have separations between them be more defined. And then yeah, instead of the bullet point system, we'll just have paragraphs. And then we'll have like the bullet point system will be reused for things like visuals, technology, tech tree, that sort of thing. Let me move this over to my other monitor, and I will start to make that shift. All right, see you later, man. Thanks for hanging out and contributing to the discussion. Well, the damage types will gain innate, will provide innate armor penetration against specific armor classes. So in the example that I gave, if you imagine a phalanx has heavy armor, and the Eidolon deals 10 damage, has 2 armor pen, and concussive damage provides 1 armor pen against medium, but basically concussive doesn't provide any bonus against heavy. But the Eidolon has base armor pen on the weapon. It would still provide that armor pen against heavy armor. But that would be the only armor pen it would provide. It wouldn't have any innate armor pen from the weapon type. So you basically have 2 different sources of armor pen. One is the base stat of the weapon, and the other one is the stat imbued based on the weapon class versus armor class interaction. So there would still be the modifier. It's just a flat rate instead of percentage, so that you don't have to worry about doing ridiculous math in the middle of a battle or before a battle takes place. You'll be able to intuit the strength of units a lot better. Well, they're made a lot more reasonable in Cause Monarchy, but it's still not what I want them to be. Oh wait, I was reading from the wrong. Right. I'm coming from a world where I recognize how bad, what do you call it? Warcraft 3's system is, and na 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 na. I never really learned Age of Empires by comparison, but I'm pretty sure they have some system going on there. Maybe it is just flat damage though. I think if you can't make something reasonable, then you just shouldn't bother having any modifiers, but like the benefits of StarCraft's armor and damage type delineation, the benefits are felt by the gameplay, but they accomplish them like the issues that crop up there. Basically, StarCraft has this problem where it's only good at small scale, which makes it pointless for an RTS, in my opinion. Like, you have to re-engineer so much shit. And even then, good is just in relative comparison to other RTS games. So. Yeah. And I think as far as readability goes, it would probably be pretty nice to have some sort of intensified impact effect based on the armor class. So if you're attacking a phalanx with an Eidolon and it doesn't deal any bonus armor, like armor penetration or whatever, it's concussive, then it would like maybe the impact would be smaller or less colorful, like less vibrant or something like that, to indicate that okay, this is still the same unit attacking, but it's not dealing as much damage as it would if it was targeting something else. And that intensity, whatever you're using to reduce the intensity visually, could scale with the eventual target or like the different kinds of targets. Yeah, the flat bonuses are just made out of the small number bonuses is just made from armor pen. So Subveek. Yeah, I think we would want to be very careful about readability, so we wouldn't want to make it too noisy. And some ideas that I would have for stuff like that would potentially be too noisy, considering it might be difficult to read at a glance. But yeah, we're getting there. We're coming up with ideas. And that's really all that matters currently. I feel like NCFI probably won't have massive fleets. I still haven't decided how I want to approach air units in general in the new environment, because it's kind of a black box. Like, I don't know how much of the reason why air is so powerful in, for example, the Brood War mod of Cosmonarchy is due to the annoyance of selecting so many units and then watching them take really stupid pathways because the pathing isn't nearly like, it doesn't scale very well with large map sizes. And also, I imagine a decent amount of it is due to map design, where that could be improved on behalf of the mapper. But I think some of it might just be that air units themselves. I don't think it's true to say that they ruin RTS or anything, but I do think that air units morph a lot of engagements if you can achieve them in great numbers, in great strength, or early on in the game. One way to go about this, about interacting with this differently, would be to or safeguarding against this would be to make every unit be able to attack air units. But I don't really think that makes sense. Yeah, the other thing is, obviously, air units in Cosmonarchy aren't going to stack. You'll be able to have different air units at different planes, which basically just means like different height levels, which is kind of an invisible stat that you'll just have to learn about. But basically, like, the bigger the ship, if a ship is of a certain size, it's not going to collide with ships of smaller sizes or larger sizes. It will only collide with ships of the same relative size. Like, there'd be a size class, almost like a range. So in such a case, you would have, like, say, a Brood War stat in unit stat is that I think it's like 14 or 12 or something. So there's some breakpoint where a unit becomes airborne. I think it's 12. So say, like, that height level means something like a Wraith, fighter type units like Mutalisks or whatever, these fighter craft would occupy that 12 level. And then, or I guess maybe they would be like 13, and then 12 would be the really small units like Vassals, Stewards, Nathracors maybe. And then you go, the further up you get, the higher the number becomes. Like Star Sovereigns are probably going to be like 15 or 16 or something like that, because they're just so large. It depends on how you want to actually set that up. I'd probably make the number of different height levels fairly small, so that you don't have to remember so many different kinds. But that would basically allow collision based on if you share the same space, same plane. So that's probably how we would handle it. We would just have some sort of behavior that treats them as if they were on the same plane, if they had the same height level. So that would be how we handle that. I don't know if that actually fixes it either, because in my mind, especially since collision for air units is going to be smaller than the actual size of the unit, so they will be able to overlap a bit, even if they aren't able to fully stack. At least I think for the smaller units, that's probably going to be the case. So, like, if you have a bunch of Wraiths or something that's like a Wraith, they can almost, like, the impression that you would be able to get from that is like, one of them is flying slightly higher than the other or whatever. So they can't, like, occupy the same size because different parts of their craft would intersect. and you'd get some midair collision. But they can occupy, they can overlap a little bit because like one wing can be above the wing of the other or something like that. So I don't know if that will impact readability too much. That's the only concern I really have with that. But assuming the readability is good, then we don't really need to worry about that. And that would just be basically it would be like having a ground unit that has collision size smaller than the physical dimensions of the sprite are, so that you can stack up onto it, or how buildings allow you to maybe climb on the bottoms of them or something visibly, but basically don't provide collision in accordance with their dimensions. And I think that's totally fine. That makes sense. However, assuming that is the case, that's not going to be as much of a nerf as you might expect for stacking air units, going from stacking to collision. It's going to be big, but for my money, one of the main advantages of air is that they just ignore terrain, and that's not going to be something that is changed by this change, right? They will take up more physical space on the map. Like a fleet is going to take up more physical space, will be more imposing, you could say. But that doesn't mean that they suddenly stop ignoring terrain. It just means you have to position them differently if you have swarms of the same height level. But that's going to be interesting, I guess. Because they won't be able to just ignore each other's collision. Anyway, the thrust of that discussion was basically just, should I have giant spaceships for the NCF? And I guess they probably should. You know what I was thinking? The Solarian has this element to it where it starts off with all the stewards, right? I was thinking that maybe you would be able to train armored personnel carriers and troop transports. And as you're training the unit, you would also be able to request certain infantry inside them. Like, so when they complete the training, the APC would pop out with those units. I don't know how smooth or seamless that system would be. But that could be one way of having like, yeah, maybe it would be a little bit too automated or whatever. It would introduce a ton of edge cases, I guess. But assuming the UI supported it or whatever, I like the idea of producing units and building this whole faction around infantry to some degree, where even all of their vehicles and spacecraft, as part of the deal, you could eject pilots, which would have their own weapons or abilities or whatever. I don't know if that would then mean, like, I wouldn't want to add like stupid extra steps for players to like have to garrison every vehicle that's produced, but maybe the higher tier the vehicle is, the higher tier the resultant infantry unit is that you can eject. And that would also mean that theoretically you could eject mech units, or you could evacuate mech units and spacecraft without them being destroyed. Although I don't know how that would work with spacecraft. I guess they would have to be docked or something. And then come back to them later to garrison them with some other unit. But I don't really know. That's an idea. That would definitely make this Regency feel very different. Just based on, like, you're literally trying to design them around the idea that they are infantry focused. Which I kind of like the idea of, but having a whole nother system on top of that where you, like, specify which infantry unit is inside this seems like it would be a bit of a pain in the ass for the player to engage with. Like, I don't really care about how difficult something is to implement. I care a lot more about, like, is it actually functionally useful? And I don't know that that would be functionally useful. I think the latest Blizzard debacle is probably going to be even... it's sad that even something as ridiculous as this is not going to likely not going to enact any actual change or have any lasting impact. Yeah, Hoop. I'm very excited about the more bizarre tech tree options. Like obviously the Psychora, so Psychora are the Regency of Psychora is this ridiculous like they're not even from this dimension. Um, they're not from this realm. Their home reality allows them to exist in 4 dimensions, and they can't. Uh, they're trapped inside 3-dimensional space, and they're trying to get back home. Like that shit's pretty crazy. Just that idea alone, that's a race you can play as. Like that's a regency you can play as. That's pretty cool. But you also get like Kolopo Azos. That Kolopo Azos is actually my favorite. I recently reordered the factions because I realized they are the weirdest faction, like bar none, at least so far. I don't imagine there being a weirder faction than them. I guess it's kind of arguable. Like you could say, you're comparing that to a regency of literal extra dimensional beings. Aren't they the weirdest? And then you've got the Cathethrons that are like these creatures of pure energy that somehow have spacecraft and like robotic exteriors. No, not robotic, but like mechanized exteriors. Like, how do they even form technology? Where do they come from? And like, they don't speak. They experience their entire life at once. So they have this pure calmness about everything because it's already happened in their mind. It's like crazy shit. Crazy shit. So a lot of really interesting ideas that, to be honest, I have not actually seen explored in any realm, let alone a video game. Yeah, they're gonna feel. So the other thing that I was thinking about something very similar to this, and I was thinking that I could try to come up with some really epic voice filter and like a voice profile for them, and then remove one of the pieces that makes it really good. And so it always sounds like something's off, something's missing. Like instead of it being additive, we're removing stuff because it makes more sense if you're literally removing some part of the process that would be there. So I have to start by conceptualizing what they would be in their space, how they would behave, what they would sound like, what they would look like, what they would feel like. And then I have to figure out what I'm removing as part of my sort of element there. I've never even heard of that franchise, but that might be something to note down. But yeah, I think it will probably be like I know one example because of the extra dimensional concept that they have for technology. The Psychora are going to be able to remove like chunks of the map. That's what it will look like for us, for the human, like the player, and for the other races as well. But in reality, they've just folded over part of the space there. So it will probably look like it's just like the end of the map or something, and like they've just like literally just is what's there. Maybe it'll be like a white box or something or whatever, like something that is like our brains erroring out trying to figure out what it is. They're going to have a lot of really interesting ideas. So obviously, since the 4th dimension would allow you to hypothetically move instantaneously across 3-dimensional space, that's going to be played up in their units where they're going to have a lot of instantaneous teleportation. Then there's also going to be stuff like being able to teleport chunks of the map around, like literally be able to just drop a bubble of 4-dimensional reality around a mineral field, like say an expansion of some sort, like and just migrate that somewhere else of their choosing. And in its place, maybe they literally are swapping the entire features of the map. And if they don't connect, maybe that even adds to the feeling of holy shit, the map has been literally modified in real time by these things. So stuff like that will probably come into play. They'll have a lot of interactions with the battlefield itself, because that to me speaks a lot more about modifying the reality instead of them. Like they are going to impact other units, like enemy units, allied units, but they're also going to be like very heavily geared around modifying the battlefield, just because that's what extra dimensional entities that have ascended to a level of tech that allows them to migrate aspects of their reality to ours and vice versa, that's probably what would happen, you know? At least that's what I think would happen. And it's also cool. So, yeah. In that sense, maybe the Psychora go a little bit further up and become weirder. Because they are definitely going to be weird. It's kind of ambiguous right now as to whether or not Kolopoazos is also extra dimensional or not, just because it's very powerful. But the idea of scaling up the tech tree to investigate more and more of the true forms of the Kolopoazos is also there. And obviously they're going to have like mental health meters or something. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to handle that. But they have the idea that they are obviously sowing madness, you know, inflicting madness upon their opponents. Stuff like that. I was thinking that at least for a specific branch or a specific set of units, you would have an aura of madness, or maybe a lot of their units would have an aura of madness associated with them. And I feel like it would obviously affect allied units as well, and that would ideally that would just gear those kinds of build orders or play styles towards more lone wolf players who want to be on a team but like don't mind being on their own. I'm not really sure how you would rectify that. One idea that I had for madness was I wanted to have units that like I don't really know how to do this because it would be so dependent on the UI, like where the camera is at any given time. But I kind of wanted a unit that entered like as it crossed, like walked off screen to the right, it reappeared on the left. The issue is like figuring out how that fucking makes sense, because like if you're balancing gameplay interactions and literal unit positioning based on like what a unit can, like what the player is looking at any given time, I don't know how you make that scalable. But it would probably be more like some, like there would be a specific unit that changes the angle of its attack every few steps or something. Yeah, something like that. I was just thinking of something crazy, like literally like a Pac-Man infinite loop, like where it goes to the right side of the map and it pops out on the left. Like something like that would be really neat, but it's just really difficult to figure out how to do that and balance it and like make it reasonable. So that being said, the weirder, by and large, the very strange, weird regencies are going to be the ones that I design like way later, just because it's more important to get the grounded ones in so that you can tell basic stories and have more approachable factions, and also because the weirdness of the factions needs to be represented inside the game itself, and I need time to develop those ideas. So I'm just allowing myself to work through those concepts like over time. Even though, like I said earlier, the Kolopoazos faction that's my fucking favorite regency. Like that's the one that I'm most excited about, but might be one of the last ones that I actually implement in game, just because they are so bizarre. It's a bit tough though, because I did want the Psychora to actually, actually be the first campaign. Where the tutorial campaign would be Ansifi because they're like the most approachable race. But the way that I'm thinking about the Psychora lore is you would have Psychora constantly send more martyrs through the dimensional gates to harvest resources that are native only to this reality, but they require and rely on back in their home reality. And as part of the rotation, like because it's so painful to exist in a reality where you are missing a dimension, like it's just not a reality made for you. Glossing over the fact that it's probably not possible, you just die. I don't really know how the fuck that would work. But the point is that you come here, you've got technology to supplement you, but it's still not comfortable. It's still not good. You serve for however long, and then you, like, theoretically, you rotate on backwards, like you head on home. And you have to do that would be like the military service of that particular faction. where they send them in, and you do your time to help the greater civilization maintain its position, and then you head on back. Oh, interesting. I never, yeah, I've not read any Isaac Asimov. I probably should, because it seems like a useful resource, if that makes any sense. But yeah. So the idea that I had for them was that they would come in, and because they are like whichever martyrs are coming in, and they would be used. The term martyr just applies here, I think, because they're suffering, at least for even if they're not dying, they're suffering for the greater good. They would be coming into this reality, and whoever our characters are would be completely new to the reality. They would have no idea what was going on, and nothing to bear. Like they would be aware of certain factions. They'd be aware of certain regencies. They would obviously study it up ahead of time. They'd be practicing, like they go through some sort of like dimensional training or preparation or something that like prepares them for what it feels like to exist without the fourth dimension. And then they come in, but experiencing it is always different, right? And so you would get the like you'd be able to explore this bizarre, hostile universe from eyes that have never been here before, from the perspective of an entity that has never been here before. I think that would be very useful for first-time players after they've blasted through the tutorial, which would be comparatively quite tame and really only introduce you to the Ansifi and maybe like one or two other very basic factions. And the idea is that with Psychora, you come in, you get a primer for it would begin. The campaign would begin with the arrival of one of the newest arrival, who would be the protagonist, alongside maybe a couple other newbies that would be supporting characters. And then you'd have like some grizzled veteran characters that would, like, they've already been suffering for however long. Maybe one of them is a character you're meant to replace, but things go wrong in the operation and he's got to stay around for you or something like that. Stick around just for the sake of like making sure that everything's good because they get encroached upon by some other faction. Yeah, that sort of stuff. So I would have to figure out how that works out, because odds are you're probably not going to pick a fight with the Ansifi of all things, or the Ansifi are not going to pick a fight with you of all things. And the Ansifi would be the faction that you're most cognizant of and knowledgeable about and familiar with by the time you're playing the Psychora campaign. So I don't know how that's going to work. It might be that they are operating in the same space. I was also thinking about, like, in general, there's probably going to be some sort of very, I won't say bare bones, but simple enough to understand, intuitive diplomacy system where you have neutral as well as hostile and allied. And neutral would just mean like they don't share vision with you, but they won't open fire on you unless you trespass in their area with like a lot of military units. And then like maybe you do that enough times, they start to be openly hostile to you. So the idea being you won't have to worry about like actually receiving attacks from this faction, but that particular regency, that particular player is not exactly on the best of terms with you. So over time, maybe you are able to forge an alliance, convince them. Again, this would be a very intuitive system where it doesn't require a lot of interaction on behalf of the player, ideally, but that's like one of the ideas that I had. And so maybe the NCV are neutral to you in this context on the mission, and there's some other race that's endangering both of you. Some other regency has arrived, set foot in your dimension, in your new dimension, your new reality. So yeah, I think that makes some sense anyway. But I'll figure that stuff out later on. I guess I should update the Psychora because I did. It was like protecting elements of grave importance to their race. And then there was the other one that was like no method of mass travel. Yeah, this stuff is incorrect now, so we have to revise. And trapped is not. It's like we'll just say suffering within our universe. And what would you say about this? You'd say Mm. In this sense, the Sycoran town center would probably be. It would be interesting. Okay, it would be. It would probably be some sort of like portal combined with more rooted, grounded technology. It would be really cool if like the construction animation or whatever, or the work animation of the Sycoran like production structures would give you like a glimpse into their fourth dimensional space, and you would almost like I'm imagining like as the unit is finishing its training, it emerges through the portal, and you get to see a four-dimensional Psychora be transformed or start to lose certain details or whatever, like as it walks through. That would be really epic, I think, if we could work that into the design, the visual design. Another way for the audience to, or the player to see what's going on there with the race. See you later, roller skates. Good to see you. Thanks for the sounds earlier. Catch you later on. Okay. Oh, I need to BR. I might only need to. Oh. Yes, this would be. I guess I could use this as well for reasons in addition to the other U. Oh. Yeah, I didn't think I wanted another BR underneath that. I guess this should be way bigger as well. I don't know what other classes we have. If only Veek were here. Mm. Okay. That's what we'll do. Hopefully I didn't break everything. Hell yeah. Mm. Still could be a bit better guidance over here, but we'll update that later. For now, I think it's time to go. I've been getting some good work done here. We streamed for almost 3 hours. We got a ton of progress made on the Ansifi in particular, as well as some general ideas about how we're going to organize stuff. So the next time I do a stream like this, we'll bang out some more progress, probably also on Ansifi, but just in general on a bunch of different races. And I'll just keep going down the list. I'll probably skip around a little bit for stuff that maybe I have less ideas about and still want to do some independent thinking on, which is probably like Ember Seat and stuff. But Keltar, Makral Das, Githroven, I'm pretty confident in my ability to get some good concepts done for those guys. And yeah, until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye.